Hi, I'm Rob Hedden. I'm the writer and director of Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, and we're going to have some fun now watching the movie. If you'll notice over the opening credits, we heard a little of that ch-ch-ch, to just start it off on a nice footing.
It's like this. We live in claustrophobic.
The guy you're hearing right now is a radio DJ that we decided to have set up the movie with a little bit of foreshadowing about the darkness and the horror and the things like that. And at the same time, we're also showing shots of New York, because this is Jason Takes Manhattan, as opposed to Jason Takes Crystal Lake, which was the last 7 movies before this one. Like these guys here, these street urchins, we see them later on in the movie, so I want to give a little taste of them right now. And the other thing about this is these guys coming up here too. You haven't seen them yet, but there's going to be some gang members who will play on later in the movie. These guys that just mugged that guy and threw the wall into the sewage there are going to play later on in the movie too. And the rat, I'm not sure because I forgot to give him billing, so there may be a little contractual problem, but we'll see what happens. This diner also plays later on in the movie, and that waitress has one of the funnier lines in the movie much later on too. And I want to say too that waitress is actually my sister Peggy Hedden. This escalator also plays later on in a chase scene when Jason is after our heroes when they end up in New York. Same thing with this subway. There's a good scene there. And these are the 2 guys also that are going to attack our protagonist, Rennie, later on in the movie. And we also saw them mugging the guy earlier a few minutes ago. And the drugs that they're using here play later on in the movie as well. This shot was done in New York. We were actually in a rowboat out there, just a few of us, and did this shot handheld. Now we just dipped down out of the water in New York Harbor, and now we're rising up out of the water at Crystal Lake, where we're going to meet Jim Miller and Susie Donaldson, played by Todd Schaefer and Tiffany Paulson, as they're having a little romantic interlude on the boat. And this is just prior to a cruise that they're all going to take to New York for their graduation. This particular shot, we purposely left it on screen really long. I mean, in today's kind of editing techniques, you would keep this shot on for about 2 seconds. But we wanted to add some suspense and set the mood in Crystal Lake, and then get into the boat with Jim and Susie. And we also hear that DJ still talking in the background as a radio that they're hearing broadcast over their radio on the boat. Kind of ties in with what we heard in New York. The funny thing about this scene is that they were both really, really nervous about doing it. Tiffany had never done any kind of a nude scene, and she was, "Oh, Rob, I don't know if I can do this. I don't feel comfortable. I don't look pretty. I told her, you're gorgeous. You don't have to worry about that. It'll be done tastefully, just little hints here and there, and keep it really sexy." And we also did a little bit of humor. We got everybody laughing and made it into kind of a fun thing as opposed to nervousness. And there wasn't a lot of crew on the boat or anything like that, so she ended up being pretty mellow about the whole thing and actually was laughing by the end of it. This scene also was a fun scene for me because you think and you pretty much know that these 2 people are going to meet some horrible fate soon enough. And it's just how you get to that end. So one of the things we also wanted to do is, because Sean Cunningham's first movie set the tone for all the movies, I thought it would be good to recount the whole folklore of Jason before the action starts, and let the audience just give them a little refresher course on Jason Voorhees. By the way, on this particular movie, we didn't even call him Jason in the script because we were trying to be secret. He was called Ethan instead of Jason. And of course, when we see the movie, it's Jason, but in the script it said Ethan, and the movie was called Ashes to Ashes, as opposed to Friday the 13th Part 8, because we were trying to keep it low key. We didn't want anybody to know we were making the movie, because if people would come out in droves just to see Jason. He's pretty much of a folk hero now. So now he's telling the story of Jason, young Jason, drowning in Crystal Lake, and flashbacks here. And those flashbacks happen to be shot in a wave tank in Vancouver at the University of British Columbia, and put in a backdrop and did all kinds of things. And the underwater footage was shot by a wonderful cinematographer named Pete Romano, who all this stuff was done in that same tank where we dressed it underwater, and we have an electrical cable there that we're going to have some special effects on. When basically the hook, the anchor from the boat, when he drops it, hooks the cable, drags it, and that shorts out. The electricity reanimates Jason, and he comes back to life and climbs on the boat. But in this scene, there is a little bit of a twist that we'll find out when he makes his appearance on board. Those blue lightning effects were all done with a technique called rotoscoping, where animators went in and animated the electricity going up. And here we used flash strobes underwater for that upper shot. And some of it was used with a dummy underwater, not a real person. Some of it was used with, I believe we used Kane even for this shot, and had him underwater just for certain specific shots when he came up.
Come on, I'm serious.
All right.
And this is the, of course, quintessential, I hear something out there, can you go check it out? And when he walks out there, we're going to expect him to die. Now the chains that were holding Jason fall down, so you know that he's not there. And there he is coming on board.
Jim? Jimmy?
Now the question is, what happened to Jim? She goes to check it out. And this is, again, one of the scenes that I had a lot of fun with, because the expectation is that she's going to find his dead body, or she's going to see him get murdered, or she's going to get killed. And that's what the audience wants. That's what we have to give them. But the whole trick was to do it with a freshness that you didn't expect, and with a little bit of humor as well. That's always fun. And here it is. But big surprise, it's Jim playing a trick on his girlfriend with a fake knife.
Got you good, Susie.
And she's just a little pissed off, but doesn't last for long in these movies because they have to get back into bed. So we can do the fun stuff where Jason decides to make his encore appearance.
Forgive me.
No.
And this is the classic The Boy Who Cried Wolf scene, where she's going to see Jason first, and he's going to go right. He's not going to believe her. This was also the first scene where we had our rude awakening with the MPAA. At the time we made this movie, our ratings were stricter and stricter and stricter. Nowadays, an R-rated movie has got double the violence that's in this movie. And I originally shot this scene where, and it's scripted this way as well, and I shot it this way, where Jason plunges. First he shoots with the spear gun. And we're waiting for her to get shot, or him to get shot, and instead, twist again. He doesn't shoot her, misses. And so how's he going to get her? How's he going to get him? What you're seeing here is just the barest glimpse of what we really shot. You saw him before grab the spear gun and plunge the entire spear gun all the way through him in much more graphic than what you're seeing here. And we had to go back to the MPAA a couple times and just keep trimming until it ended up the way you see it in the movie now, where the actual plunging into his gut is really not in the movie anymore. This was all shot on a lake in British Columbia that we found that is an actual. It's actually a place where I don't know if they aren't Boy Scouts of America, whatever the equivalent is in Canada. It's a camp. It's basically Crystal Lake, the real thing. Only they don't call it Crystal Lake, but it functions in the exact same way. And we found this and we thought, well, it's perfect. In all these movies, Crystal Lake has been shot in numerous places that have been, all been called Crystal Lake. They haven't. Sean Cunningham's was the first, and it was shot in this country, but since then they've been shot all over the place, depending on logistics of location. And ours, we shot a portion of the movie in Vancouver, so that's where we found this lake.
No, please, no. No, please, no.
This was also a point where I relied heavily on Kane Hodder, who plays Jason, because he had done it before, to just get the nuances of Jason. He doesn't move quick. He's very slow and methodical. He cocks his head a certain way. He's got those mannerisms that you just have to know. It really came in handy having someone like Kane playing the part with the experience. Now, this is a really interesting story about, well, you be the judge after you hear it, but that ship that you saw there, we got that ship 3 days before we were going to film, and a huge amount of the movie takes place on this cruise ship, which we called the Lazarus, for pretty obvious reasons about raising of the dead. We originally had a boat called the St. George, and that boat we lost 3 days before we were going to film, and so I had to change all my shots around this boat. And it's a very small boat that we shot from various angles to make it look 3 times bigger than it was. You never really get to see the whole boat in one shot. And we ended up using the St. George just for some interior shots, and we used this ship here for the exterior shots. And we actually took it out to sea and filmed on the sea. We shot it in Horseshoe Bay in British Columbia and did some amazing stuff on it that probably a bigger budget movie would have. We did a whole lot of stuff that we had no right to do, but we just did it. Now, this particular character here, played by Alex Dyken, who's the deckhand, is the sage. That's really an echo and an homage to what Sean had in his first movie about the crazy old town guy who says, "You're all gonna die," and all the foreshadowing here.
You know, this cruise was your idea, so at the very least you could show up on time.
Peter Mark Richmond, who plays McCulloch, and Barbara Bingham, who plays Rennie's teacher and her closest confidant in the movie, were great and relied on both of them to bring a lot of stuff to their characters. Peter Mark especially just is funny and played such a good bad guy, and he's an old pro. I remember in this particular scene when we were on the dock, at this point in the schedule, I wasn't sleeping enough, and he just, "Hey, listen, Rob, just go lie down for 10 minutes and close your eyes. I guarantee you'll be refreshed if you just take that 10 minutes out." And he was dead right. I went and did that, laid down, and all of a sudden I came back, I felt like I'd slept all night. It's just little pro tips that he gave me. Now you'll see here on the boat in the background, we're not seeing the whole thing in one shot. We're seeing the back end of it, we see the front end of it, we see low angles, and never really get to see the whole thing up in one sitting because it would give away the fact that it's not big enough to be a cruise ship for all these teenagers.
You or anybody else, and I know what's best for her. End of discussion.
We're also setting up in the scene that he's Rennie's uncle, and that he doesn't want her on the ship because she's afraid and she shouldn't be there. And what we find out later, she's afraid of the water because she had a drowning experience as a young child, and there's more to it than that. We're also setting up here Scott Reeves, who's on the right, who plays Sean. He's the romantic lead in the movie with Rennie, and that's his father, who's the captain of the ship is his father. And we're setting up this whole thing where he can't live up to his father's expectations, which is going to play on later in the movie. Miles, played by Gordon Curry, who's on the left, had quite a bit bigger part in the movie as originally conceived. He was a diver, and on his way to the Olympics and all kinds of stuff that played later on into his death. But because we had to move the pace along, and our first cut was kind of long, we needed to trim some things, and unfortunately, some of Gordon's scenes had to be trimmed. It gets the story jumping along because we all know what we want to see, and we want to see Jason get here and do his stuff.
Okay. How about we start up the engines and come around 180 degrees?
You forgetting something, mister?
And here's where Sean fails to live up to his father's expectations.
Send out the International Maritime Signal, followed by a security broadcast warning other ships that we are underway.
And of course, what comes up is this voyage is doomed for Sean, but not in the way he thinks it is. And now we get our favorite deckhand to give him a little foreshadowing. Now we know that Jason has sailed into the harbor and is going to get on the ship, and now we meet the deckhand again.
This voyage is doomed. Yeah, tell me about it.
This also keeps in tone with this particular Jason movie, in that we wanted to have fun with it. We didn't want it to just be and it was a risk we took because all the other movies have been pretty serious with not a ton of humor. And in this particular one, we wanted to have a few laughs. We wanted to make a little more of a party. We wanted to have a little bit more tongue-in-cheek. And things like this voyage is doomed. Yeah, tell me about it. That kind of stuff. And the opening where Todd Schaefer plays the trick on Tiffany Paulson, that's all part of it. And we just wanted to have a little bit more fun. So we threw in a few jokes here and there. There was also a scene that was cut here where when Sean first arrives, he finds out Rennie is not going to be on the cruise. And he's very bummed about it. And instead, he finds out, wow, she actually made it on the ship, which is great. And we set up these two and the fact that they got a thing for each other.
We changed our minds.
He also gives her a little gift here that is going to play on later in the movie as well.
I got you a present.
But I didn't get you one.
Forget it. It's a dumb little thing anyway.
Sean, I love it.
Now later on we'll find that this little necklace gets ripped off of her when she's attacked by these gangbangers in New York. And then Sean ends up recovering it.
22 stories tall.
This particular scene too, we actually took the ship out to sea and shot all this stuff on the water as opposed to faking it. And that was ambitious because for every shot we had to turn the boat around just to get the lighting to match, and we'd take the thing and do one pass all the way out to sea, then turn around and come back and shoot the other way, and we had to get the water moving in the right direction. And a lot of technical things went into shooting on the water. A lot of directors will tell you it's just the biggest nightmare to shoot on the water. I happen to love the water, and so for me it was fun, but it is a lot of work. Now this sets up two characters too that are going to be, well, at least one of them is going to be among the first to fall to Jason's wrath. And here's one right here. Her name's JJ. It was played by Saffron Henderson, and she's, the rock star wannabe, playing a Gibson Flying V, which isn't a real Gibson Flying V because Jason's going to end up smashing the heck out of it, and those things are worth about $1,000. So instead we mocked up a pretty cheap guitar to make it look good. And in fact, I still have that guitar sitting in my garage. Maybe it's a good eBay item. I don't know. You tell me.
Your parents really came through.
Now, Martin Cummins here, who plays a character named Wayne Weber. Martin has gone on to do some great things. He's been a series star in Canada and all over the place. He's a very talented young actor and very funny. And the whole idea with this character was to come up with a guy there's one in every school, at least one. And he's, the filmmaker wannabe. He's the future Steven Spielberg. He's going to make a movie of everything. And this is also really, I hate to say, but it dates the movie because if you look at the camcorder he's using, it's a tank. Now these little digital ones that we have are, will fit in your pocket. And this thing, takes 3 people just to lift it onto your shoulder. It's so heavy. But we all had one, didn't we? I had one. Now, this is a sad thing because in every cast, there's going to be one that has to go first. And in this particular case, it was Saffron, and she's such a sweetheart, and it was like, we didn't want to kill her off because she's so great, but you also don't know for sure if she's going to be the first one to go, because the way these movies work, you think somebody's going to die, and then they don't die, or they die later, or somebody else dies, or there's the trick like we did at the beginning. We set up the whole opening where you think it's Jason stabbing her, and it turns out to not be the case.
She didn't push me into this.
This scene is, again, setting up the relationship between Rennie and her uncle. And Jensen Daggett plays Rennie, who's just was a fantastic find, I thought. She had brought this vulnerability and this sweetness, and she has these beautiful eyes, and she just comes off so sympathetic, and you really care for her. And it's such a nice contrast to Peter Mark Richmond, who plays McCulloch, her uncle, who's just such, you've seen him in everything from Twilight Zone to on and on and on. He was in Naked Gun movies. He's just a talented man because he does funny stuff as well as he plays a great bad guy, good dramatic roles. This scene was shot on a ship called the St. George, which we used for the interiors, and it was this amazing, huge cruise ship that's no longer functioning, but was dry docked, and we used it for the interior shots, and this is the real engine room. And huge interior. We used it right and left for all kinds of scenes on the ship because so much of this movie takes place on the ship. That brings up another interesting story, but maybe we should watch the death first, and then I can talk about that. This is probably a hard scene to watch for any guitar lover, because who wants to see a Gibson Flying V bashed into some girl's head? It's, with all due respect to Saffron, that's an incredible guitar. I play the guitar, so it hurt for me to do this. I was thinking, what guitar would I just cringe if it got smashed into somebody? That was done with a plexiglass where we had a blood splatter cap put on the guitar, so right when it hits the camera lens and splats blood, because we couldn't actually, I had a shot where it hit her head. MPAA said can't do it, so we did that as an alternative. That also set up another thing we're doing in this movie that makes Jason, I think, a little bit more mythical, and that is that he tends to be in many places at the same time. You saw it in that scene where he's in one spot and then she runs it off and away from him, and all of a sudden he appears right in front of her and bashes her with the guitar. That theme is echoed later on. It'll be in the disco and other places where he's here and he's there, but he moves slow, so it really makes him frightening. This particular shot is also one of my favorites because if you noticed at the beginning, if you want to fast forward back and look at it again, the camera comes off of him, it goes through the porthole all the way into Rennie here and to a close-up. There was no way to get a camera through that little porthole to cross all the way across the cabin, so what we did is we built a wall that had a line in the middle, and just as soon as the camera lens cleared that opening, we had the guys slide back the walls and have the camera just keep going with the dolly and everything else. Now, probably nowadays they would do something with CGI, but back then we were doing everything as much as we could in the camera and trying to be as creative as we could with how you shoot things. This is the first time in the movie that Rennie gets a flashback of young Jason, and at this point in the movie, it doesn't make much sense. It's like, who is that, and what are we seeing? And you pretty much anybody can guess that it's young Jason, but the question is, why is she seeing flashbacks of young Jason? And that will pay off later on story-wise in the movie. Now, this is one of my favorite characters, too, who's played by B.C. Dupree, plays Julius the Boxer. And then we have, up here, we have Charlene Martin and Kelly who play pretty much the prom queen and her friend, Eva. And the interesting thing, of course, here is that this was Kelly's first movie, and she's gone on to become just a big star. She's done Scorpion King and X-Men 2, and just was a sweetheart. And it was hard for me because in this particular movie, we had to cut a lot of stuff to get the pace along, and there were a lot of scenes between these two girls that had to get cut out of the movie that were setting up their relationship. The fact that Kelly was going to be going to college and she might lose her scholarship if she hung out with this girl because of the drugs and everything.
So good looking.
And we had to lose a lot of that stuff and keep the essential stuff that moved the story along. And pretty much get to the core of it, which is these girls, especially Charlene here, is on the scam for some action on the boat, which involves drug, sex, and rock and roll. Pretty much the three major food groups for teenagers.
I think it's time for some recreational activity, girl.
And now we're back to Wayne. And this is another
Have you seen my niece anywhere?
funny dialogue scene that Peter Mark just brought to life
What's the problem?
about predicting futures.
Started 5 minutes ago and she hasn't shown up yet.
Oh, well, maybe some of us don't want our futures predicted.
Well, in your case, I'm sure that's true.
And he couldn't be more right, because Wayne is going to meet with a bad fate later on, and I'm sure he didn't want that future predicted. And now these girls are doing, of course, what they shouldn't be doing, and what the audience didn't know, because we cut the scene, is that this girl stands to lose a big scholarship if she gets caught.
You know, if we get caught, I could lose my signing.
Oh, you know what? That's dialogue happens to be in the movie, but there was another scene even before that set this whole thing up.
Jesus. Have you guys seen my dog? I think he came this way. No, we haven't. Did you care for a hit?
This also sets up the whole conflict between Rennie and Tamara, played by Charlene, that sets up the revenge that she's going to want to get later on, and have a little fun torturing her by pushing her overboard.
Here, boy.
I think it's time for Jason to make an appearance. This is another thing where we saw the dartboard, and so we made it really a big obvious thing, but the fact is we didn't end up using the darts, because we didn't want anybody to predict exactly what was going to happen. That was one of those where you would just go, oh yeah, we're going to have a dart scene, and we decided it wasn't gruesome enough anyway, but let's let the audience think about what the next potential crime was. And here we think it's Jason who's going to be coming to kill these two girls, but instead it's even worse. It's McCulloch. The mirror shattering is actually a prelude to something that's going to happen with Tamara later on in the movie. That's her demise, and the idea of the shattered shards of glass on the ground. It's subtle, but what the heck, we go for subtlety occasionally in these movies. And it also sets up a scene that McCulloch's going to have with Tamara later on in the movie regarding her biology project that is overdue.
They're out of town.
Well, I'll make sure that you remain on board while your classmates are out seeing the sights.
Of course, Tamara's got this whole thing planned out way in advance, and how she's going to take care of McCulloch and not get kicked out of school or lose her graduation or any of that.
That narking bitch niece of his is a different matter.
And she's, of course, assuming that Rennie
Rumor has it she's a teen
narked on her, and that's going to set up the revenge that she gets later on. This particular scene was added way after principal photography. We realized we needed another spicy suspense kill scene with Jason after we'd already finished shooting. And we shot this. This was the only scene that was shot back in Los Angeles, where all the other scenes were shot in either Vancouver or New York. And we found a stage in LA and shot this with a small crew. In fact, I did all the camera work on this. Brian England was there doing the DP work, and I shot this whole thing handheld with a Panaflex, and because we were flying by the seat of our pants to do this particular sequence. Pretty much the whole crew had been finished the movie and had gone off, so we did this, and it was another one where it got edited by the MPAA from what we originally shot.
Guess I need to work on my left-right-left combo.
But this was the kid, too, that had boxed Julius in that earlier scene.
Hey, listen, no hard feelings, man, okay?
And
Track down those babes.
I'm pretty sure that we used even a different actor for the voice than the guy who was actually talking, because his voice was muffled under all that. We looped the whole thing later on.
Julius?
Now that was about maybe a 28 frame shot as opposed to what we had originally, which was a lot more coverage and steam and blood and all these other things.
So, are you having fun yet?
Yeah, a lot.
This scene also is half as long as it originally was, where there was a whole talk about Barbara Bingham and her whole, she was going to give up teaching and write a novel and all these other things. And Ms. Van Dusen, you know, who becomes her confidant, is the one who catches them doing it. But again, when McCulloch shows up, he blames her for the whole thing, as opposed to who really did it. And this also sets up, it echoes the flashback of young Jason that Rennie saw in that scene in her stateroom. That there's some connection she has to Jason, and we don't know what it is at this point in the movie. Something happened to her when she was young that involved this young Jason pulling her underwater. This is also an element that was in none of the other Friday the 13th, just because we wanted to try to do something different. There was maybe a little more shades of Nightmare on Elm Street. And that is to integrate this whole hallucinogenic, spacey, not necessarily straightforward horror, but to get into some weirder stuff that involved flashbacks and something that was in her mind and supernatural and all these other elements.
Some friend you are.
And I think at this point we've sufficiently set up that Tamara is a first-class, well, you know, a bitch. Can I say that on these things? Oh, I'm going to say it, whatever.
Grab her some towels, okay? She's fine. She's just got back.
She's fine. She just almost drowned. And she's got a total phobia of the water and had a horrendous experience as a child, but she's perfectly fine.
I can't swim.
But see, not swimming is the least of her problems, but that also does echo into something that happened as a child about her not being able to swim.
Good God.
Take it easy, Charles. She's all right.
Well, I can see that. You've done a wonderful job of supervising the kids. What the hell happened here?
It wasn't her fault.
Give me those towels. You stay away from her. Both of you.
Now, of course, he's the one who should be staying away from her and not these two, and that makes the audience...
And you're all gonna die.
And there we go again with the deckhand, with more foreshadowing. That everybody loves this guy. And he'll, of course, tell a little bit more about Jason later on. This particular scene, our special effects wizard, Marty Becker, came up with a brilliant idea. We wanted to do something that was, again, along the lines of Nightmare on Elm Street. And having the blood pour out is a little Stephen King-ish, a little Shining. But this mirror shot is brilliant. And the way Marty came up doing it, CGI was how we would do it now, but the way he came up with it is we actually shot it with the whole set turned sideways, and he used liquid mercury, which when it's not moving looks like a mirror. And he had a mechanical hand come up out of that liquid mercury to grab her in a quick shot. And then we cut around to the kid's real hand grabbing his throat. And that was played by our editor's son, by the way. Steve Merkovich is the editor, and his son Tim played young Jason in the movie for us. It was a real family operation making this movie. But that scene is a real departure from the traditional Friday movies.
Where is your final project?
Wouldn't you like a glass of champagne first, Charles?
Where did you get this?
This scene,
Oh, like that?
Mr. McCulloch
Just for us.
in the movie, of course, acts disgusted and offended when we actually shot it. And he's laying on the bed with her, and Wayne comes in and catches him in bed. You hear him in one shot going, I like it, I like it. But of course, we couldn't use that in the movie. We had to shoot it again, but he was having quite a good laugh doing this. And Charlene had a lot of fun doing it, too. She really milked it. In fact, we all had a good time doing it, now that I remember.
Now you stop that. I mean, really?
Take a closer look, Charles. I want to make sure I've labeled all my organs correctly.
And this is the particular shot that when we did it, in one shot, you hear Peter Mark on the bed going, I like this, I like this.
I don't believe this. What do you think? I'm your teacher, young lady. Well, now you've gone and done it. Not only are you going home, but I will see to it personally that you spend next year back in a high school classroom.
Of course, she has this covered completely too, because it's all been put on tape by Wayne. And she's pretty much working everybody. She's working the teacher, she's working Wayne, and Wayne has got a serious thing for her. And she's used him to get the tape, and she tosses Wayne out of the room, and he feels like an idiot, and
as for you,
she's a bad girl, but something tells me she'll end up paying for it later on. This scene was shot also on the St. George ship, because we tried to shoot most of the ship interiors on a real cruise ship, where the exteriors were shot on the boat that we called the Lazarus, which also, I forgot to mention, a few years after we made the movie, I heard that the ship sank. Now that's kind of scary. It got cursed from Jason or something, but this ship we used actually sank.
That's so sweet, Wayne. And I really would love to stay and chat.
You know, this poor guy. This is what happens when you go after a woman you shouldn't have.
Wayne? You're an asshole.
But I think that that's pretty much happened to a whole lot of guys in high school, so it's pretty easy to relate to. So who's Jason going to get? Is he going to go after Wayne, or is he going to go after Tamara? This shot was actually a model shot. We shot this with a small boat in a tank, and there was lightning going on, and it was a special effects shot. I don't know what I was thinking with this. I think I was thinking maybe Jack Nicholson in The Shining, or a little Hitchcock with the suspense and let the sound get real quiet, and then he punches through the thing like, here's Johnny. And that particular shot was a stunt woman we had. We didn't want to throw Charlene into a mirror and bump her head. And then we went back to Charlene there. This sequence also was pretty heavily edited for ratings. And we had a lot more going on. In fact, I even had an aftermath shot where you see her laying dead on the ground with about 30 or 40 shards of glass sticking up out of her. That was also excised from the movie. And this was more about, this was really actually done edited in a traditional Hitchcock kind of way, where it's what you don't see, like the Psycho scene in the shower, where it's you cut to the blasting horn as opposed to seeing the shard of glass go into her. This scene, Brian England and our camera crew, we were all pretty proud of this, because we didn't have a fancy, this is a real ship and a real bridge of a ship, but the seas weren't heavy, there wasn't a big roll to the ship, and we figured out, how are we going to do this and make it look like we're at sea and have that sway of the ship? And I think Brian came up with the idea, hey, let's do it on a Steadicam, and let's just slowly sway the Steadicam back and forth and just try to remember how fast we're doing it and match. And so it's got this really gentle, slow thing where if you look at the horizon, it's just slowly sinking. Well, that was all done with the Steadicam, which is a gyro-operated camera. And just a little bit of lean here and there, it gives it a real, you couldn't do it with a handheld. You could also do it, sometimes they do it in the big budget movies with a gimbal. The whole set's moving, the camera stays still. Well, I think we did a pretty decent job here using the Steady to simulate that. I think to up the stakes here, it's always good to kill off the crew, because then you got the kids that have to sail this thing or get it out, especially with a storm going.
I double-checked those lifeboat stations, too. Carl. Oh, my God.
Now, Warren Munson, this is also a shot that we just did for this specific thing where it was done where we printed the frames, double framed to slow it down in more of a strange jerky thing and exaggerate that slit in his throat. We shot that slit in his throat about 5 different ways, and the MPA made us choose the one that was probably the tamest. We had one where when he arches his neck back, it's just a huge gash down to the Adam's apple and blood spurting out.
What about you? Are you staying here?
Never gonna be what he wants me to be.
The other interesting thing about at this point in the movie is the way it was originally scripted, pretty close to now, maybe a little bit later than now, we were going to be in New York, the way I had originally envisioned it. This movie ended up taking place much more on the ship than in New York, which always concerned me a little bit because it's called Jason Takes Manhattan, but it was pretty much dictated by budget and scheduling and other elements. So we had to spend more time on the ship and less time in New York. I had scenes on the Brooklyn Bridge. I had scenes in Madison Square Garden with Julie's doing a boxing match there. Pretty much, I had an Empire State Building scene and other things. Instead, we put more on the ship.
Mayday.
And I think it turned out good, but I still would have liked to have had more in New York.
This is the motor. Vessel
Now,
Lazarus.
I don't know about you, but I think it would pretty much bum me out to walk in here and find that my dad had just been killed by Jason, and I'm not that good of a sailor. We set that up earlier, and now I've got to somehow save everybody. But that's pretty much what Sean is faced with here. And he's got this teacher McCulloch who's not going to be helping much either. He's going to be questioning his every move.
Hello? Are you there?
I demand to know what is going on.
This was also shot on a real ship with the Steadicam. And I think we were actually at dock when we shot these particular scenes so we could bring in rain towers and not actually be out at sea for the stuff that was inside at night, where we didn't need to see way out there on the horizon.
They're the last ones.
And now we hear from our deckhand a little bit of the legend of Jason.
Jason Voorhees.
You're insane. Jason Voorhees has been dead for years.
He came down the river and he's gotten on board. He walks the ship here and now.
This is also the beginning of where Peter Mark Richmond, the McCulloch character, starts to think that maybe these killings are responsible of this crazy old deckhand.
That lunatic has been spouting off about Jason ever since he came aboard. And it's no coincidence.
That doesn't prove that he's the one.
Walking corpses are not real.
I think he's going to find out differently when he gets to New York.
Yeah, well, these dead bodies are shit.
And this is also a fun scene where the student stands up to the ass teacher.
Find this motherfucker before he finds us, huh? Are you with me?
Watch your mouth, young man, and you'll do no such thing. I'm in charge here.
School is out, okay?
That was another nice moment where we realize that the kids are going to be in charge and not McCulloch. Everybody loves that because he's such a bad guy.
Christ. Where's Rennie?
She's dropping the anchors.
This also was a working ship, and she really did. She had to learn, Jensen Daggett had to learn how to drop the anchors on this ship, and there's a whole protocol that she was taught to come into this room here, which is a real functioning anchor, and the real captain of the ship gave her a little lesson and showed her how to do it. And when she pulled that, this is the real deal. That thing started to move and an anchor really dropped. This is also another moment where we're waiting for something to happen to her with the classic creeping up point of view shot behind her, and put in a little bit of the stuff. And maybe let's look at an axe too, just in case we needed one more element to think that she's gonna get it in the back. Now, you know, if we would have killed her off, that would have been actually pretty cool, because no one would have expected that. She's the female lead in these, and that's a main tradition in the Jason movies, is the heroine survives.
You had me worried to death.
But Sean said that we needed to drop the anchors.
I'm the one you should be listening to. Do you think dropping an anchor in the middle of a storm makes any sense whatsoever?
We had a lot of rain going on here. There was also another scene here with Kelly and Tamara that came before this, before Tamara was killed in the shower, and where she basically tells her friend that she doesn't want to have anything to do with her and all that we had to lose it for pacing as well. That shot is a replacement for a shot where we saw Tamara's whole naked body with glass stuck in her. And now we go into Kelly's demise. The thing about this too is it also brings up that element that I discussed earlier about Jason being everywhere at once. That was all done in one shot with a Steadicam too, where we leave her on the stairs, follow her all the way into his, and then start circling around. It's all done in one Steadicam shot without cuts until that moment right there. But we come around here and you'll see Jason burst through the doors in the shot right here. And then he's going to pop up everywhere. And she's going to be dizzy, the lights are going, she's locked in, she can't get out, and everywhere she turns, he happens to be. This was also a scene that we wanted to do something that, because of the MPAA, we wanted to have somebody die that didn't necessarily involve knives and axes and smashing heads in and all that. And the trick with these movies that I found out was you've got to, it's coming up with really creative and innovative ways to knock off your protagonist in the movie. And it's been done. 7 movies before this one, and done brilliantly in these other movies. And how do you come up with new ways of doing it? And so you try to take what's been done and maybe put a twist on it, or you kind of come up with new things altogether. And this is one where we decided that was really going to sell this is actually the end of the shot, right here, where just that sells it almost. And that was done with the stunt woman as opposed to actually throwing Kelly on the ground, which she would have done, but there was no way I was going to have that happen to her.
What are you taking, Julie?
This is also another scene with humor, where he says,
But this gun.
he says, I'm not taking nothing. I'm nothing but this gun. He's not stupid. He's a good boxer, but Jason's no match. This was also shot in the engine room of the St. George. Shot on the same day as when JJ had the guitar whacked into her head. And the whole thing we set up here with his camcorder and everything else is he needs his glasses to be able to see, and so that's going to buy us some fun when he gets shocked with a little steam and his glasses fall off. And, well, you'll see. The thing about this scene and all these moody interior scenes is Brian Englund, our director of photography, was just did such a brilliant job. He made these movies look so good. And the photography in this was just tremendous, and he really gets all the credit for that. Just wonderful, deep, saturated lighting, and just a great stylized look that he brought to this. And this is where Wayne realizes he didn't shoot Jason, but he shot an innocent guy who happened to be the same guy that Tamara was scoping out earlier, and thought, no, this is a guy that maybe I can have some fun with. Now, there goes the camera, but that's just as well. They got a lot better cameras now. That thing was a clunker. The whole thing about this, too, is that Wayne and JJ were close friends, so for him to not really be able to see that well and then trip over a guitar and then find her just added a little bit to it. This was fun, too. We actually threw him in for one shot, but then we used a stuntman for all the pyrotechnics and set him on fire, and he had an asbestos suit on, and it went on longer than you see it in the movie, but it was pretty much the same shot.
Did you find Rennie?
She's locked safely in her room. No thanks to either of you. Have you brought her back on course yet?
He's doing the best he can.
He's a son of a captain, for Christ's sakes. You ought to be able to operate this thing. Well, do something.
Again, McCulloch just can't be evil enough. He's got to just keep on with it. And this is the beginning of the end for the ship. So far, people have been dying, but now the ship's going to die. Because of Wayne's little action here, the ship's going to catch on fire, and other bad things are going to happen. But at least Jason's being thoughtful enough about setting off the fire alarm, which I thought was very nice of him to do that.
Worked. We're back on course.
Good. What's that?
The fire alarm!
So now, we got a fire on the ship, but McCulloch doesn't buy it.
Already thought about that. Nobody could possibly see a flare gun in this storm.
There's only one person who needs to see it. I'm going to find that deckhand.
But what about the fire?
How do we know there really is one?
What are you talking about?
Use some common sense. Setting off a fire alarm causes panic. The same kind of panic caused by suggesting that Jason Voorhees is alive and aboard this ship.
I think there's probably not anyone sitting in the theater or on their couch that doesn't want to see that guy dead at this point in the movie. He's just so negative. Now, Miles here, the character of Miles played by Gordon Curry, had a much bigger part in the movie. He was an Olympic class diver that took a dive. Yeah, there's a scene where he does a beautiful dive off the ship, and we set up this whole thing about his diving, and he's Sean, the male lead Sean's best friend in the movie, and a lot more stuff there that for the sake of pace we had to lose. The movie in its first cut was over 2 hours long, and it was just too long for this kind of a movie. We needed to make it go boom, 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 get a little faster. But see, this still works. I think story-wise it worked better when we knew that he was this wonderful diver and took this high dive at the beginning of the movie. But here when he goes off, originally he was going to do a nice big flip, like a dive, and then land on his back. And we also saw him in an earlier version actually get this, we saw the impact. Here you see the aftermath of what happens after he got flung off the ladder there and landed on the antenna spikes. And this is one of those Hitchcockian well, it's been used by the Coen brothers and a lot of filmmakers. And then it's kill off a character, but have him come back. You think he's dead, but have him come back when you don't expect it. And that's what happens with Julius. You think he's dead, you think he's drowned, you kind of forget about him, and then he's going to come back. And here, this is, we're maybe expecting that kid to show up in the porthole again, but instead, the way we did this was a very simple technique, where with that kid, with the young Jason fading in there in her hallucination, and it was a lock-off shot where we put him in, then we take him out, and we dissolve between the two shots, and it makes him transparent, where it was done with him there and without him there, and then you just combine the two images. It's very, very low-tech special effect. This, too, was set up in the beginning of the movie where that particular pen, since Rennie's going to be a writer, she gets a pen from Miss Van Duzen and that Stephen King once used to write his stories with, and when he was in high school. And it comes into good use as she stabs Jason in the eye as opposed to write a wonderful novel.
I don't understand what's happening to me.
And now it's time for the ship to say sayonara. Here's the thing. Those explosions and those flames and that smoke was real. It's not special effects. We actually blew up the interior of the engine room and didn't do much damage because it was a lot of flash as opposed to actual detonation. But we really actually did it on the ship. Nowadays it would be controlled on a stage and all that. Well, we didn't have the money to build that amazing engine room. We found a way to do it safely and actually blew up and flooded to some degree that real ship, the real engine room of the St. George. For a flooding scene that comes later on, we built pieces of it on stage so we could really, really flood it out with our actors in a controlled environment. But the flames that you saw there were the real thing. And this particular scene in there was one of my favorites too, where the shot where you see the knife there, you go past it, and then you come back all in one shot, and now the knife has mysteriously disappeared, and you're of course expecting it to be Jason, but instead, well, you'll see. Now this is the real St. George that we flooded water into, and we shot slow motion. This is all the real deal. This is the real thing. But then some of these shots later on where they're walking down here, this particular sequence right here was built on a stage with a big dump tank, huge gallons and gallons, thousands of gallons of water, and because we needed to control it so these actors wouldn't drown and we also wouldn't sink a real ship.
Get everybody off the ship.
That was no special effects. That's the real thing. The only thing is we built that on a stage as opposed to actually flooded out the real ship for this particular scene. It's not exactly the Titanic, but for a little horror movie, you know, it did okay. This particular shot was done with an actor that we cast before we cast Scott Reeves for that one shot, and for various circumstances, he ended up being replaced by Scott, but we ended up using that one shot of him walking up the stairs with Rennie because you couldn't see much except for the top of his head.
Not another word about Jason, do you hear me?
No, I don't. This time you listen to me if you want off the ship alive.
Thank God. I just lowered the lifeboat.
We have to go.
Oh, wait. I left the others in the restaurant.
There is no more restaurant.
This is where we find out that there really aren't a whole lot of survivors left, and we're down to our core group of people that are going to make it. This shot we had to do many, many times with Alex, the deckhand, because the whole trick was him to come out thinking that he was going to do something, and then the reveal of the axe in his back was very tricky to do and not see the axe, because it was there the whole time he staggered out and not see it until the end of the shot. And it's very funny with him staggering out back and forth, where we kept having him do it because we kept seeing pieces of the axe. That shot is a combination of rotoscope lightning as well as real explosions going off on the mast. That shot that you just saw was done on the real ship. This shot, that shot's the real ship. The shot looking down is on a tank, is in the University of British Columbia wave tank, where we built 50 or 60 feet of the side of the ship to match, brought in wind machines, rain towers, and it's a tank that actually creates waves in it. It's done for research on shipbuilding that they do at the university. And we went to them, and they'd never used it for a movie. And we said, hey, can we use it? We want to do this whole sequence with the ship at sea sinking and people escaping, and they were game. They never used it before. But if you there's waves coming here, splashing, and wind blowing, and rain. It's a big money shot, and not easy. This is, of course, the return of Julius, who some people thought had met his maker underwater earlier, but he survives it. Because, of course, we got to see him box Jason in New York. So now it's just our core group that are going to paddle from wherever they are into New York Harbor, which could take several days. To convey that passage of time, we calmed the water down in the tank. We added in some fog. We had a dim backdrop there. And they're actually paddling in this gigantic swimming pool inside of this university, and dissolve to convey that they can't see where they're going because there's fog, they're tired, they're sleeping, giving up hope.
I hope you can find shore soon, Captain. We all don't want to drown out here.
You know, this guy, you build him up to be this evil, you gotta see him go. I think if McCulloch would have lived to see the end of this movie, there would have been a lot of booing.
Hey, Sean. Come on, man. I made it, so can you, huh? All right, man.
We've had a whole stretch of the movie where it's been action and killing, and this is sort of the proverbial calm before the storm, where we get a little bit of a breather. And plus, I think it would have been a little bit of a reach to get him to New York, within an hour of sinking on that ship. As I said earlier, too, this point of the movie was supposed to have happened probably 20 minutes ago, at least, if not a half an hour ago in the pacing of the movie, and get him to New York at the halfway point of the movie, if not even earlier. Also, this shot here, that shot, the shot of them in the rowboat, these shots were actually done in New York Harbor with Brian England and myself sitting in this rowboat shooting this with a handheld Panaflex, because I wanted to get the Statue of Liberty, and it was great for our actors to sit there and actually see these shots for real. It was probably a little crazy. We had another larger boat that was there to help us out, so in case anybody fell overboard, but we were actually out there in New York shooting this. This shot was done at a docking harbor in Vancouver, and it really attests later on when Jason comes up out of the water as to what a stud Kane Hodder is. We shot this, it was cold, it was wintertime, and the water was in the 40s. And I told Kane, I don't know about you blasting up out of the water like this. I mean, the water is like freezing. It's hypothermia time. He had to hold his breath and go underwater. He never complained. He insisted on doing it himself. And he sat in that water that was out of 45 degrees or something and was stuck under there. And just did it without complaining. Just did a great job. This is also something I had pitched earlier on. Before we even started writing it, I said, I want a scene where Jason gets to see himself on a billboard. So we had the whole thing with it was going to say the New York Rangers, and there were some legal reasons, so we changed it to Eastern Hockey League, which is vague enough for the attorneys. It was a nice moment where, we made a little fun of the hockey mask. This is another one where you think maybe it's Jason who's lurking and about to get in, but it's our two guys who we met at the very, very beginning of the movie who had held up that guy walking down the alley, stole his wallet. Only now they're going to do the same thing, but there's maybe something else here that's just as appealing as the money.
Got some good shit here, home.
I think it's the jacket that he wants, don't you? No, maybe it's her. Maybe it's her he wants. And of course, he grabs the necklace that her boyfriend gave her as a present, so it's got sentimental meaning and jacks up the drama a little bit.
Please don't hurt her.
This princess? What I do?
The other thing too that it underscores McCulloch being such a rat is he just does so little to save his niece. Where Sean wants to go after these guys, Julius wants to go after him, and McCulloch is, no, we can't do this. You know, he doesn't really do anything.
Follow us, we blow our fucking head off. Comprende?
So what, we just gonna stand here? Let's go.
Julius! Calm down, will you? You heard what he said? They'll kill her.
Yeah, but really it's about him being a coward, and that's why he doesn't go after her.
Now look, I think we'll be more productive if we split up.
Now, that's probably one of the stupidest things, and it's a joke we did this, because in every horror movie, when somebody says, let's split up, you just scratch your head and go, that is the dumbest thing we can do. We should stick together if we're going to survive. But McCulloch, of course, says, let's split up. This scene sets up it jacks up Rennie's hallucinogenic scenes that come later on, where she's been seeing young Jason and she's been hallucinating, but now that these guys pump drugs into her, it really ups the stakes of what her, visually what she's going to see. And it also introduces another element that Jason isn't usually a hero. Jason is the bad guy. Inadvertently in this scene, Jason Voorhees he saves Rennie. He shows up here and takes out these guys in a way that it's kind of like you're rooting for Jason to kill these guys because they're so bad as opposed to they're good guys. Again, casting Jensen Daggett in this she's so vulnerable and just looks so virginal with her softness and her innocence and sympathy and everything else. But now Jason, of course, is going to come to the rescue. Originally, too, we saw a lot more graphic violence here, where his hand goes in, we see in a close-up, we see it go all the way through. What we did is instead shot a little insert of just the needle coming through from the other side. But I remember getting a comment from a fan who had said, I think this is the first time I've seen Jason actually be a hero. He's usually just the bad guy.
You're dead, fuckhead.
For Kane to do this, of course, he's an old pro at this because he's a stunt man as well as a stunt coordinator as well as an actor. Every time he gets shot, there's a little explosion that goes on his chest. It's a squib, and it's actually like a little firecracker going off against his chest with smoke and stuff flying out and everything else. And not only that, he walks through glass and he does all of these things. He's a pretty macho man, that Kane Hodder. A lot of these scenes, including this one, were intended to be shot in New York City. This sequence here with Julius was going to be shot in Madison Square Garden, but again, we changed it to this. Also, interesting note about this scene is that when Julius is trying to call, and Jason right here puts his fist through the glass. This was the only scene in the movie where someone got hurt. When V.C. Dupree falls out of that phone booth, he landed on a piece of glass and put a small cut in his hand from the glass. It was minor, but it was still, an injury, and it was the only injury on this entire movie we had, and he was fine. I mean, we patched him up in 5 minutes, and he was perfectly okay, but still, I thought it was... You don't want anybody to ever get hurt on these movies, and I suppose since that was the biggest thing that happened, we should be pretty lucky and pretty grateful.
These are combos, keep the feet light.
Here's where, of course, we pay off Julius, the consummate boxer. And the trick here was to make it real. For me, I wanted it to be... We can have a big payoff at the end, but if you listen to the sound of the punches, it's not like the big cowboy westerns where you hear wham, wham, wham. We tried to make it sound like it would really sound if a fist hit a plastic mask like that, and the body blows and everything else. We wanted to feel real. And I'll tell you, V.C. Dupree threw a whole lot of punches in this one. At the end of the scene, when he's just thrown everything he's got and he's dead exhausted, he was not acting. He was dead exhausted when he finally gets to the end of this long rooftop where he's punched. I haven't counted. Somebody out there, I hope, is counted how many punches he threw, but a whole lot. And he keeps going, and we bloodied up his knuckles. And in fact, actually, his knuckles may have gotten a cut or two on their own, but he pounded away until where he could barely stand. And I remember originally too, we thought, well, Jason's going to have to knock his block off. But then I thought, well, let's put a little icing on it too. Let's have it just do one little step further than just his head getting knocked off his shoulders.
Give it a shot.
And here's the payoff. That shot right there, that 3-second shot, and of course his head lands in the dumpster, which is very funny, I thought. The thing about that one shot with the POV is I had said to Brian England, hey, I want to get the decapitated head's point of view as it's flying through the air. And so he said, oh, that's great. Let's put a camera, an IMO camera, which is pretty much a disposable camera, in a big Nerf ball, and we'll take turns throwing it off the roof, and we'll just shoot it and see what happens. And it was a total experiment, and we did it, but we ended up using it in the movie. We called it the Decapicam.
Ready?
And here again, she's just been shot up with drugs, and so we used some interesting optical effects to give her point of view stoned out.
We have to find the others now.
And it'll play into hallucinations that she has as well.
Freeze! It's okay, she's with me. My apologies, miss.
Now we think, of course, that since the police are here, that everything's going to be okay.
Rennie, oh, thank God. Are you okay?
And it also sets up that she is actually closer to Miss Van Duzen than she is her own uncle.
Mr. McCulloch, Jason is here in New York. Rennie saw him.
Just shut up about Jason, will you?
Is it true, Rennie?
So now they've convinced the cops that something's not right here, and
First order of business is to find Julius.
And the cop says, I'm sure he'll pop up somewhere. And when he opens the door and the lights come on inside, Jason's left a little surprise. Now, Rennie, of course, is going to drive this thing. She's going to run down Jason and start becoming a little bit more of a hero in this thing as opposed to the victim, like, which is a quintessential classic thing that the heroines do in the Friday the 13th movies. And she slams him, but we all know that that's not even going to put a dent in Jason's plans. We actually took this car and we used a cable and we smashed it into that wall. And we did a technique here too where we slowed everything down and just got a real surreal with it, where she thinks she's killing young Jason as well in her hallucination and slams the car into that wall. And we really blew up the car and we really did slam it into that wall. But of course we did it without the actors in it.
Quickly, let's move.
Also, it's a moment here where the car blows up with Miss Van Dusen still in the car, and the one person really other than Sean that she can relate to goes up here and dies. And I think it's a cathartic moment for Rennie that triggers this flashback / hallucination that she has when she knows that Miss Van Dusen is dead. And to do this shot where she looks down into the pool of burning gasoline on the ground, we went to a special effects man named Jim Danforth, and I told him what I'd like to see is I wanted to see a little rowboat paddling across this pool of gasoline. And so it's subtle, you don't see it at first, but then all of a sudden things start to fade, and all of a sudden there we see that little rowboat coming across, and all of a sudden it fades into the lake, and now we learn what it is about Rennie's past that makes her afraid of the water, afraid of Jason, and we learn a thing or two about her uncle as well.
It's so pretty today.
Yeah. Perfect day for swimming.
This little girl, Amber, who played young Rennie, was just so beautiful. We looked at a lot of girls to find someone who looked like Jensen as well as just had that sweet innocence, and Amber did a wonderful job in this, and quite brave because we shot this. We didn't use a double. I mean, Peter Mark Richmond actually, in the scene when he's supposedly teaching her to swim the hard way and he throws her overboard, he gives her a shove overboard, Amber really did that. He really shoved her over, and she could swim, fortunately, but I didn't want to do it with her. I was afraid that, I just said, well, we can double you, we can do it. And she said, no, I can do it. I want to do it. I can swim. And we also shot this scene in that same tank where we had the big storm that happened.
You're telling a lie.
Some of the echo on their voices we added in post-production, but some of it was actually the sound of the tank. And those trees in the background you see was a big backdrop. It wasn't put in later in post. It was a translucent backdrop screen that was actually there. So what we shot involved no special effects. It actually was sitting on the water there in the background. This was also shot underwater at that same tank, and Tim Merkovich put on the Jason makeup and yanked her under, and she remembers that what her uncle did was he shoved her overboard and told her this big story about Jason, and then shoved her overboard, and then she had this horrible experience.
Push me into
I was only trying to teach you.
You almost killed me.
What I was trying to do in this scene, in this sequence, and the whole through story with Rennie and her uncle was to introduce character elements that are just to take it in another direction that hadn't been done in the other Fridays. And not because, I thought, oh, it's going to be better, but just because it needed to be different from the other ones. The other movies are all wonderful and for various reasons, and I wanted to to bring something new to it that echoed also the very first movie. I'd asked him when I undertook this movie, I go, can I assume that this is the last Friday the 13th and really kill Jason and have it sort of a bookend feel where we talk about the legend of Jason at the very beginning of the movie and conclude it with that. And so they said, sure, yeah, kill him off, because they figured, we can always bring Jason back if we have to. This scene also, I'm a big Hitchcock fan, and there's a scene in Frenzy where the camera starts on the ground floor and goes up to the upper floor, and it's all in one shot, and you hear things going on. The little spin I put on it is that McCulloch runs in the bottom door, and it tilts up, and all of a sudden, somehow Jason got up there ahead of him and throws him through the glass. And this, of course, was that barrel of toxic waste. Now the rat that we saw in the beginning of the movie is in the grease there dead, which we only caught a glimpse of. But he stuck this guy, and we used a stuntman for this, and I tell you, that guy deserves serious credit, because he actually did that. It's not Peter Mark Richmond in there, but it's one of our brilliant stunt guys who rose to the occasion and said, well, I want to do it, I'll do it. And he held his breath. We took we did minute takes, and he was stuck under there until we yelled cut. So now we're left pretty much with 2 people and a dog from the ship. And it's also here just a little bit of a moment between these two have never had time to really have a quiet moment between them, and to have a little bit of romance.
Everybody I care about, I lose.
It's not gonna happen this time.
But we can't, of course, let this go on too long. Let it get quiet. And then gentle music. And then I like to do a thing where before some big, noisy, startling thing, you let it get quiet. The same technique we used in the scene where Tamara is listening at the bathroom door before Jason's fist goes blasting through. This scene was shot in Vancouver in a subway station. We replaced the glass so Jason could go through glass that would shatter like that. And the subway in Vancouver is spotless. No graffiti, doesn't look anything like New York. So they were gracious enough to let us completely trash it up with the graffiti, like where it says Quaton lives there in the glass. Quaton was a band I was in when I was in high school, and it was called Quaton and the Maxi Whackers, and I was Quaton in the band, and so it's a very, very inside joke, and we decided to throw it in for a few laughs. Again, shot this on a real subway, really rolling down the tracks. They let us have a subway, and we took it all over the place and shot all this stuff on a moving subway train, handheld and every which way. Also, coming up, we wanted to do something that I think happens in a lot of these movies where you kill Jason. Jason dies several times in a movie where you think he's dead, maybe he's dead permanently, but we wanted to do that here where Jason, as he comes out of this thing and they basically tackle him, surprise him, and he gets electrocuted, which echoes the way that he was awakened underwater with the electricity. It makes you think that there is a shred of a possibility that this may be it for him. Maybe we actually killed him off, because it does echo that beginning. We originally shot a piece here where she touches him to see if he's alive, and we decided that was probably not the brightest thing because she'd get a nice shock herself if she touched him while he was against the electrical part of the tracks there. This scene here, we built that subway stairs right there. There really aren't any stairs. It's on flat ground, and I had the actors walk like on their knees and then slowly rise up to make it look like they were coming upstairs, because there wasn't a subway. This is Times Square in New York, and we brought in a 40-foot crane and did a big 360-degree shot rising up into the air and whizzing around, and brought in a lot of our own people as extras in the background. It was a big feature film shot coming around here and building the subway stairs and all that, since there really wasn't a subway station right there. But for the shot itself, we wanted to convey that feeling of, it was the perfect place to put the camera, so that's why we put the stairs there. This also is going to echo those street urchins we saw at the very beginning of the movie who were listening to their boombox and stuff. And also, this was shot with the music and the tone to feel like the movie's over, that he made it. But then, of course, it takes a lot to kill Jason Voorhees. If the electricity didn't get him, then we got to figure out another way to kill the man who hasn't died for 8 movies. So now we start our sort of the last lap of the movie in New York, shot in Times Square. And these are the urchins. And this is a little bit of humor in the tension where Jason, well, you see, he puts an end to their boombox. And they're not going to put up with that. These guys are tough. And also, you don't always get to see his face. And I like the idea of letting them see his face, but not let the audience see his face, at least not yet. This scene has, for me, one of the most memorable lines in it, when they come up and her reaction when they say, "There's a maniac trying to kill us."
There's a payphone in back, but it's broke. Look, you don't understand. There is a maniac trying to kill us. Welcome to New York.
And then, of course, he shows up. Now, Peggy Hedden, my sister, who played this waitress, went to school in New York at Tisch, and so the accent came she's a Californian, but the accent came good, easy for her. Also, Ken Kersinger there, who's our stunt coordinator, was the guy that Jason just threw into the mirror. He's a big guy, and Kane actually threw him over that. We used a little bit of a springboard, but Kane lifted Ken up and actually threw him over the counter into this mirror, which just shows you that Kane's a pretty strong guy. This particular shot, we're now back in an alley. It's in New York, but it's really been shot in Vancouver for this particular shot. There was no need to be in New York to shoot this little set piece. We did a good job. Our production designer, David Fisher, did a pretty wonderful job of making Vancouver look like New York for certain sequences like that one there. This tunnel sequence, which is the finale of the movie we're coming up on, climbing down into the sewers of Manhattan, we found a series of tunnels underneath the Vancouver post office, and they let us use it. I don't know that they'd maybe filmed down there a couple times, not sure, but we looked at it and thought, oh man, this is just great. We took very little dressing. All we needed to do really was add some water in there, add some cobwebs and some stuff hanging around, and put those China hat lights to give it, and that's all we shot with. We didn't add any other lights other than the ambient lights there to give it a real feel and make it kind of spooky and bring Jason into it. let him just go in and out of darkness like that. And this was all done with a Steadicam. You don't see any tracks from a camera rolling on a dolly or anything. We had our Steadicam guy running backwards as fast as he could to get that shot, and this was the reverse of that. And then you find out here that the sewer here floods out every night with toxic waste.
Sure can, but we haven't got a minute to spare.
What do you mean?
Toxic waste, son. The sewer floods out with this stuff every night at midnight. Less than 10 minutes from now. Come on, follow me.
It occurred to me that if we couldn't kill Jason with electricity, which echoed the beginning where he was awakened by electricity, the only real way to kill Jason Voorhees is by drowning, because that's the way he died as a young boy. So that's where the idea came to have this end in New York and make it a big production kind of sequence where the tunnel floods out and everything else. As in pretty much all the Friday the 13th movies, at the end of the movie you're left with a heroine who has to become the hero. And that's what Rennie does here. She ends up pretty much saving Sean's life and getting Jason to follow her. But Sean is actually alive. A lot of times the guy's dead and it's just the girl who's left. In this case, Sean is still alive. But she really takes on the role of the hero from this point on. These tunnels under the post office were just a labyrinth. We got lost a few times down here. Also, Rennie now realizes she's got to do something to stop Jason, so she finds a can that's got something that's pretty toxic in it. And we finally get to see, and this was a tricky thing to do, to sell Jason's face. You couldn't see it too long, just quick shots. And what we did is we put a chemical on the latex that Kane was wearing and used another chemical in the mixture that she threw in his face, so when the two hit, they would interact and they would foam off of his face, and it would burn him, and you wouldn't get to look at it too close, too long. And Kane insisted on doing this himself. It couldn't have been pleasant having all that goop thrown in his eyes and his face and everything else. And not being able to see very well because he had this mask covering his face to protect his eyes. This was all done in the real tunnels here under the post office. But some of the shots, like that particular shot and this particular shot, we had to duplicate this corner of the tunnels on a stage, much like we did the flooding on the ship earlier. And for the final scene where Jason gets drowned in this thing, because we couldn't actually flood out these tunnels. It would just take billion gallons of liquid and toxic waste to do this. These shots here where the lamps are swinging, I actually ran down that corridor and hit each lamp with my hand and then ran out of the camera's way as fast as I could so we could get the shots. And then we did it in slow motion. And here, this is all done with a model. That shot there where you see the water rushing, this shot where you see the water rushing, those two shots were done with a model that were shot at high speed with high-speed film. And this stuff here in the corner was done on a stage in a big tank that we built with a big dump tank, and actually dumped thousands of gallons of waters onto Kane. And the actors, they were in this shot. We didn't have much trial. We were kind of crossing our fingers when we shot this to see if it would work and it would look good, and also no one would get hurt, which is the most important thing. Is you don't do anything unless they get hurt. I mean, excuse me. You don't do anything unless they don't get hurt. I hope that wasn't Freudian. And here, of course, we echo the way young Jason died originally, drowning in the water. And I had asked the studio and the producers, can I really come up with a way that looks like he's truly dead, even if you decide to bring him back later on? Could I make it feel final, almost like this is a bookend from the first Friday the 13th that Sean Cunningham made to this one, where, you know, a young boy drowns in the first movie. It turns out the mother is the killer in the first movie, but young Jason drowned as a boy. And now in this movie, Jason, who's this mythical character who may not even be human in any way, shape, or form, finally, when he's truly dead and his soul is gone, reverts back to that young boy that he was when he drowned in the lake. And that was the mindset behind this. And that particular mask, I still have as a souvenir. It's the final Jason mask of his demise. But just to keep the audience on their toes here too, we wanted to add just one final little zinger, and that is, it's very small and subtle, but he gives her back her necklace, and then there's a shot from the other side where we think it may be even, we don't know who it is, but somebody is still there sneaking up on him. And it's this next shot where you see it in a little bit of uneasy music, come around a corner, and maybe it's Jason, they don't see her, and all of a sudden he comes rushing up on her, but it's not Jason, it's Toby the dog. I had a dog that was named Toby once, so that's where that name came from. This was also shot in New York, and we came up out of this. This was at about 4:35 a.m. It was the last shot, actually the last shot that we did in New York, and the sun was just about to come up, and we came up out of this shot, and you can even see in the background the sky is kind of there's a little bit of blue in the sky. It's because it was I think it was around 5 in the morning, and this was the last shot we got off, and then that was it. So it was pretty lucky, actually. We got all the stuff we needed to get done, and then the very last shot, the sun's coming up, and we get this nice kind of reverse twilight shot for the end of the movie. And that's all I gotta say about this. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something. I think I did, because I couldn't remember half of what I was talking about until I saw the movie again, and every time you see it, you see new things in it. And it was a pretty great experience doing it. It was my very first movie, so I learned tons making it. I'm still learning by watching it years later, and I appreciate all of you guys watching and listening to this, and go out and make a movie yourself. Thanks.
Shadows that point the way never lead you out. It's a game we play. The madness comes and the madness goes. It's a simple world, but it's all they know. You try to fix it, but there's nothing you can do. You just gotta see it through.